Thanks for being along with us. This is Agriculture Today. Well, crop insurance coverage is very much front and center. A new announcement about the budget proposal out of the administration has caught our guests' attention. We'll visit about that, and we'll also talk of the opportunity potentially for you corn and soybean growers in certain counties to experience lower premiums going into the sign-up period for that coverage here quite soon. Risk management specialist Art Barnaby, K-State Research and Extension, is with us once again. Art, first, just a quick comment from you on the budget proposal out of the Trump administration, which, when you look at the agricultural side of it, definitely targets crop insurance for a cut. We've been talking about potential cuts to this program, several conversations along the way here. And what's your first blush thought about these new proposals?
Well, the great thing about the press is that they put it out in a press release which doesn't have any of the details in it, and the details always make a big difference. Sure. So take this with a grain of salt. That's in the press release, the one thing they want to do is lower the subsidy on the harvest price option by 15 points. Now, if that's the only cut and it only applies to the harvest price and doesn't apply to the entire insurance contract, then that would not make a huge difference in premium costs, especially here in the Great Plains. It would have a much larger impact in the Corn Belt. That would be who would get hit with that cut, if that's the only cut. And we don't know that because we got a press release and important details get left out. The one thing that would affect farmers here in the state is that they are going to limit premium subsidies with $500,000 adjusted gross. Now, I don't know if that means they can still buy, but at a higher rate, or if it means that they would be barred from participation. We have done analysis on that here at Kansas State. Michael Taylor was the lead on that project. And what we discovered is if you eliminate those large-scale farmers, you are also eliminating the lower risk producers, and that affects the insurance pool. And in order to keep the insurance pool at a 1.0 loss ratio, targeted loss ratio, that means you're going to have to raise rates on everybody that's left. Interesting enough, a researcher out of Mississippi State University using data from RMA that was corn and soybean data and a much larger study because it was the whole country, arrived at the same conclusion, that the larger producers had a lower risk coefficient than the small operators, and the reality is that you're taking a lot of premium out that's being paid by the lower risk producers. So all of this is on Ag Manager, of course. You can read all the details, and of course, like any good academic institution, you might have to read 10 pages to get through all the details, whereas this is one paragraph.
Right.
And the press always likes one paragraph.
You bet. But to stress, it's a budget proposal, and there's going to be a considerable amount of wrangling over this on Capitol Hill before it ever sees the light of day.
I think Pat Roberts would say it's dead on arrival. So until I see something stronger than a press release, if I were you, I wouldn't get overexcited. But it is something you want to keep up to date on.
Art, you've put together some information once more in advance of this crop production season. The potential for lower premiums to be paid by producers participating in the crop insurance program on corn and soybean production in specific counties that fall into a certain risk category. You might explain.
Well, first of all, I'm looking at the price that is being determined now. It's the February average. And on corn, right now we're averaging $3.95. Last year, the final price was $3.96. That means the guarantee is going to be almost identical. In other words, if you had $400 worth of coverage last year, that's what you're going to end up with this year if you buy the same coverage level, et cetera. Okay? On soybeans, it's very similar. They're at $10.19. The current average is $10.04. It's a little bit lower than it was a year ago, but not much. So, rather than $400, maybe you got $385 worth of coverage, but it's going to be fairly close. What has changed is the volatility number. The volatility number dropped 4 points on corn from 19 to 15. You have to go back to 1999 to find a volatility number lower on corn. So this is a big drop. In the case of soybeans, it's a 3-point drop from 16 down to 13. 13 is near a record low, but it's not a record low. if we go back and look in history, in 2016, we actually had the volatility number for soybeans at 12%. And I think you'll recall we actually did radio at that time telling farmers that, hey, this is a really good buy because they really got it, the price part cheap.
Yeah.
My point is, if you're paying less premium, what's changed from a year ago? Are you less likely to have a loss this year than a year ago at this time? Nobody can remember what they thought a year ago, but if you're really honest with yourself, I don't know that there's any reason to believe that you're going to have less chance of a risk of a loss this year than where you were setting a year ago. Now, we know it's really dry out there, and right now we're wondering if we're going to get enough rain to plant these spring crops. But nonetheless, what I did was I compared what the premium would have been, and these are 2018 premiums, with 19% volatility versus 15%. Now, it is possible, even with these reduced volatility numbers, that your premium would actually be higher this year than it was a year ago. Now, why that's true is because RMA could have changed the underlying base rate. Mm-hmm. So if they didn't change the underlying base rate, this is going to cut your premium from a year ago. I compared my numbers within year. So the base rate that's in these rates is the same in the comparison because all I did was change the volatility number, holding the base rate constant.
And what you find here is that in those lower risk counties, those premiums may well fall.
And these are at the higher coverage levels, 75, 80, and 85% coverage levels. In Grundy, Iowa, we were looking at something around 25% reduction in premium cost over what it would have been at 19. Again, we're holding the base rate constant. I need to emphasize that. I also looked at Webster County, Iowa, about a 20% reduction there. Of course, those are low-risk counties, and that's where it really shows up. Then I went down to Sherman County, Texas. That's in the Panhandle, and they are looking at around a 14 to 15% reduction. This is irrigated corn, okay? I looked at Brown County, Kansas. That's north of Topeka, and you're looking at about 11% reduction in premium over what it would have been. Now, you get into high-risk counties. I looked at Ringo County, Iowa. Not everything is great in Iowa, and we're looking at something around 6% reduction, assuming the base rate does not change. I looked at Garfield, Oklahoma, and it's less than 3%. So counties, like Rawlins County, Kansas, I would expect something similar, 3%. It won't hardly be noticeable, and that's assuming the base rate didn't change. But the volatility number is not even being measured at this point. They're posting it, but it's not measured until you get to the last 5 trading days of February. So it's possible it could change. However, highly unlikely. One of the things you can do with this lower volatility number is consider taking your crop insurance budget and buy up a coverage level. Mm-hmm. What that does is raise the minimum price required to trigger payments without an insurable yield loss. So you're putting a lot more price protection in the contract if you can afford moving up to a higher coverage level.
So this is opportune for growers in those lower risk counties, once again, to stress.
Yes, the greatest impact is going to be in the low risk counties. Folks in the other counties are not going to really notice any difference in their premiums. I'd be surprised if they do, simply because the coverage level is going to be about the same because the prices are coming in very close, and the volatility doesn't have near the impact on them.
Once more, you can track the latest price information on the coverage at the RMA website, and you're keeping a steady flow of information on the agmanager.info website as well on this, Art, and it'll also be fodder for discussion at those Farm Bill meetings that K-State Research and Extension is co-sponsoring with the University of Nebraska coming up late February into early March, and you're obviously on the program for that, and with the March 15th deadline happening shortly thereafter, you have an opportunity for a good exchange on crop insurance options here, don't you?
Yes, we're going to primarily focus on the policy issues, but the impact of those policies, like reducing the subsidy on the harvest price, what would that mean, versus eliminating the harvest price, which has also been proposed. One of the things we're going to do is talk about those unintended consequences of some of these various proposals that are out there. Some of them we think might have a chance of actually becoming law because you never know what's going to happen when you move this stuff to the floor, particularly if they have open debate. Yeah. You may have to manage under a new set of circumstances that you hadn't anticipated.
This is a good chance to talk those things over and also provide your input on the makeup of the Farm Bill, including the stature of the crop insurance coverage within the Farm Bill. Those are taking place in Kansas, 2 locations, Wednesday, February the 28th, Dodge City, then Thursday, March the 1st, here in Manhattan. In Nebraska, Monday, March the 5th in Meade, Tuesday, March the 6th in Scottsbluff, and Wednesday, March the 7th in Hastings, Nebraska, in identical programs at each of these 5 sites. You can read up on how to participate in these at agmanager.info, of course. Art, appreciate your time. He's a risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension. That's Art Barnaby, and we'll be back with more in a few moments on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Our guest now has been spending more than a little time looking at the opportunities for controlling what has become the premier insect threat in grain sorghum production in Kansas, that being the sugarcane aphid, and exploring ways of dealing with this pest through natural enemies. He's actually been sharing much of this with producers on the sorghum school circuit this winter. J.P. Michaud is a research entomologist at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. Now, J.P., we should acknowledge that last year, the sugarcane aphid, while still around, wasn't quite as overwhelming a threat as it had been in previous years, correct?
Yes. In fact, we may, in fact, find that perhaps 2015 and 16 represent the peak years in which this aphid is a problem. In other words, we may be entering a period now where it's going to recede in importance.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Don't want to let our guard down as an industry. That's one of the points you're pressing with producers, right?
Yes, absolutely. Reasons for optimism, but not complacency.
Talk about your work then, and you've been evaluating the potential influence of certain insects as natural predators on the aphid.
Well, and basically everything we have that normally helps control all the other aphids does very well controlling this aphid. So all the lady beetles and the lacewings and the syrphid flies find it a perfectly acceptable prey. The problem in those first few years is we really didn't have a large community of natural enemies inhabiting the sorghum. They did respond to the arrival of the aphid, but they weren't there in sufficient numbers when we had those large numbers of winged aphids landing in the field. What I saw this year was very large numbers of natural enemies in the fields of sorghum, even before the aphids arrived. And so it's really as if they're responding to the crop now as a plant that's likely to have lots of food in it for them. And one of the most important ones, a very voracious aphid predator, is the Asian lady beetle. And this is not an insect we're accustomed to seeing in sorghum previously. However, it has responded very well to the aphid, and now it seems to be finding itself quite at home there. And it's going to be a really, really big help to us. And so those first few years, it wasn't that we didn't have enough different kinds of insects to control sugarcane aphid, that they were not present in the field early enough to get control of the aphids before they established in those fields.
But the Asian lady beetle you speak of here is evolving to that point where it is in place upon the sugarcane aphid's debut, right?
Well, this is what it would seem to me, and it's quite interesting to note that much the same thing occurred in soybean. We really never had a lot of Asian lady beetles in soybean in the 90s. It's been around for a long time in North America, but once we got soybean aphid invade the Midwest around 2002, all of a sudden people started complaining about all the large numbers of Asian lady beetles. Well, they had responded to the soybean aphid's arrival and the large numbers of soybean aphid, And now they're a regular resident in the soybean crop where they feed on a lot of other prey as well. So this isn't unprecedented. The very, very similar thing, I think, happened in soybean in the early 2000s.
And the question then becomes, will their effectiveness be long-ranging? Will they continue to feed aggressively on the sugarcane aphid over an extended period?
Well, I would certainly expect so. As I said, it seems to me that they're not just responding to the sugarcane aphid, they're responding to sorghum as a crop that, has lots to eat there, because I found them abundantly in the fields this year, even without sugarcane aphid, preying on whatever remained of other insects and other aphid colonies that we're trying to establish. But the other thing, of course, is we've had a lot of varieties fortuitously expressing some resistance to the aphid, and so unfortunately, there were a lot of them out there, but unfortunately here in Kansas, the ones we looked at are not as exceptionally high-yielding varieties, and some of them are actually not very agronomically suited for our area. However, because most of these companies are able to identify the parental lines that contain this resistance, I think this year we can expect a lot wider range of resistant varieties to be available, and hopefully a number of those will have better agronomic suitability to our area. But again, you have to consult with your seed representatives.
But the hope here is that what we call integrated pest management can be attained through the combination of promoting this beetle activity and the use of resistant hybrids.
Exactly. The two work together. They synergize each other. And so, resistance in the plant, resistance traits in the crop delay the development of the aphids, so they give the natural enemies more time to control it before they escape, control. They just work together, and a good level of predation by natural enemies keeps the aphid populations low and reduces the chance that you'll have biotypes evolve that overcome the resistance in the crop, which is unlikely, I think, in this case, because we have so many different traits, resistance traits out there.
Now, growers always are curious as to whether there's anything they can do in their crop management at planting time, after planting, to encourage that, in this case, Asian lady beetle activity and not, in fact, interfere with it.
Well, thinking of the spring coming at us, we really reach peak natural enemies. All those aphid predators and parasites are going to build to their maximum numbers right at wheat harvest. So they're all going to come out of the wheat, and the only other spring crop that produces a lot of good beneficial natural enemies is alfalfa. So if you're really concerned about maximizing your beneficial insects on the farm, you're going to be careful to avoid spraying wheat and alfalfa. Now, I understand we have problems with weevils in alfalfa, but there are materials that you can select that will be very effective on the weevils and yet not harm the natural enemies. And one such product is available from Dow DuPont. It's called Steward, and it gives very, very good control of the weevils, and yet it's much, much softer on all the beneficial species. So there are alternatives, but they're usually not the cheapest alternatives. But you have to factor in the fact that there's a cost involved in killing all those beneficial insects along with the pests. So you have definitely a benefit if you can preserve them.
So you need to think in terms of comprehensive management across fields, across crops. That's really
exactly. Because remember, the aphids are migratory like so many of our pests, and yet the natural enemies are not. So you need to think of what you're doing to retain those beneficial insects on the farm. You're going to produce them in the wheat without even trying. So the question is, come wheat harvest, what are you doing to help hold those insects on the farm? Mm-hmm. Well, you might be planting a cover crop for a number of agronomic objectives with cover crops. If you can include in there some plants that will flower and provide floral resources around the time the wheat crop is maturing, that will be helpful. Almost all those aphid natural enemies need some plant, especially floral resources, at some stage in their life cycle, especially the adult stages, which will be the ones that are coming out of the wheat. If you have marginal areas that you're used to keeping in grassy strips, well, grassy strips aren't very productive or don't really provide a lot of prey for natural enemies. They tend to be dominated by ants, which are not very friendly to other predators. So if you could encourage or allow the growth of some perennial flowers in marginal areas that are normally uncultivated, this will help a lot. a single strip of flowering perennials will support a lot of insects. And I mention flowering perennials because people are always concerned, of course, with weeds, and they don't want these unmanaged areas to become sources of weeds. Seeds in their fields. Well, if you allow the perennials to establish, they will outcompete the weeds, which are all the annuals.
So several ideas to contemplate here. I do want to slip in one more thing concerning sugarcane aphid control. You say, JP, that there may soon be a new product available to growers, and this could be part of the toolbox, as you put it.
Absolutely. So BASF, we expect, is approaching registration for a new insecticide in the 4D class. So that would put it in the same category as Belief, or carbine is another name. The active ingredient there is flunicamid. This will be a completely new product, but very similar mode of action, which is very selective for aphids, practically harmless to everything else. So it'll be a really good addition to the toolbox, especially since people are concerned. We've got a lot of reliance on the use of this Savanto, especially to the south, where they get infested a lot earlier. So the worry is that, with all this use of Savanto, we might see some resistance develop. So it'd be nice to have another product other than Transform where we can switch to an alternative.
Well, once more, JP, we've seen a drop-off in the pressure from this past last year. Don't want to rest on our laurels as producers.
I will say one other thing.
Sure.
That, if you really want to be on top of the situation as a sorghum grower, you need to sign up to the MyField site for an account, be part of the monitoring network so that if you find anything on your farm, you can submit that as a discovery, and it'll be verified by a specialist like myself. That'll come to my attention and then be verified, and you'll receive alerts in real time, for example, if the aphid is discovered nearby in your county. So that's the place to go for real-time information.
myfields.org, correct?
That's correct.
myfields.org to tap into that service, be part of the scouting effort, if you will. JP, appreciate the information, and we'll talk again soon.
It's a pleasure as always, Eric.
He's J.P. Michaud, research entomologist at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return shortly with more here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
When I pulled up to the meeting place, the barbecue crew was busy with the meat.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Last evening, a week ago, I gave a talk at the annual dinner meeting for a Farm Bureau gathering. I hope I gave them a good talk. Culture in agriculture. I told them I was not going to talk production or economics. No gallons of milk per cow, nor pounds gained. I did not go into the price of a bushel of wheat, or corn or beans. I went a little out of the box and showed slides, or rather scenes, of the agricultural landscape as I have seen it at times. The meal was delicious, with a fine piece of meat, with all the trimmings, locally catered. It was good. I was early for the meeting. There had been talk about a winter storm and snow. To make sure, I put extra weight, cement blocks in the back of my truck, because, being a farmers' meeting, I expected the show to go on, regardless of the weather. Early in the morning, It had snowed, but not heavy. When I drove out, the roads were open. I did pass one flashing road sign warning of winter weather ahead, out west. I didn't have to go that far. When I pulled up to the meeting place, the barbecue crew, dressed warmly, was busy with the meat. Just passing the stand, the aroma was delicious. I carried my projector inside and sat up. Slowly, the room filled with farmers and their families. A sturdy, laughing face walked up to me and asked if I had done a radio program about some sheets on the fence line, going south of town. I had to think. Then I remembered. Yes, indeed I had. It was a welcome home grandma sign. Well, he said, that was my family who put that up. And Grandma will be here this evening. At the time I made the program, using that message, I did not know if Grandma had been traveling or had been in the hospital. And now I learned that she had been in the hospital and that it had been serious. But all was well now. He regretted that he himself had not heard that radio program. But the neighbors had heard it, and they had told him. I asked him if he would like a copy, and he said I surely would. So Christy, my secretary, pulled up the copy, February 8, 2017, and he should have it by now. I hope he read it to Grandma. Of course, the accent might have given him some difficulty. I talked to other people. A student who wanted to know more about the profession of landscape architecture. There wasn't much time to talk. I felt bad as I could have talked on the topic the whole evening. But we exchanged emails, and I promised I would follow up with more information, and I've done so. The big envelope should have arrived. I take career choices very seriously. It's not easy to find that job which gives the fulfillment we all look for. I've been lucky, but I too have taken many twists and turns before I came and stayed in Kansas, now longer than half my life. I talked to more people. They all knew me from this radio program. It surprised me and made me happy. I talked with one smiling farmer who said, "Every letter I write, I think of you." I looked at him kind of puzzled, questioning, not understanding, and then he added, "You did one program on writing the letters of Kansas, our state, full out. You said, do not use the abbreviation KS, because who knows, we're Kansans, for the good or not so good." I laughed, because I remembered, and I always write out Kansas full, as we all should. At the end of the evening, a farmer stepped up to me and said, "I'm glad to meet you." However, he said, "I don't know why, but I always thought you were a little small, fat guy." I was quite happy to disappoint him. Standing in front on the raised podium, I could look over the large group, a group of solid farmers who could laugh and had good appetites. There was a lot of camaraderie. One thing which made the evening special for me, briefly I could reflect on the small town of Zutphen, north of Abilene. It had disappeared off the Kansas map, but I could show them the Dutch city of Zutphen in the Netherlands, where the people who settled Zutphen must have come from. I showed the view scenes of the river IJssel, along which the old city is situated, dating back to 1100. It shows a stately row of white houses along the wharf where riverboats come to shore. It shows the cathedral spire started in 1300. Today, the population of the city is around 50,000. It's an old city. The Vikings have raided, coming down in the longboats all the way from Scandinavia. Just think, some people came all the way to Kansas. They settled and built a mill, now long ago. They worked the land. Altogether, I had a very good evening among friends who made me feel very welcome.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. That's our time for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.